The towering glass structure of Caldwell Enterprises stood like a beacon in the heart of the city. Inside, a world of crisp suits, hushed conversations, and relentless ambition thrived. At the top of it all sat John Caldwell, a man who had built his empire from the ground up, shaping it into one of the most powerful corporations in the industry. John was a man of numbers, deals, and strategy. His life was structured, precise, and unforgiving. Employees feared his sharp mind and colder demeanor. He didn't waste time on small talk, nor did he indulge in pleasantries. Work was his world, and emotions were an inconvenience. Yet, as he sat alone in his expansive office late at night, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, something from his past crept into his mind. A memory. A night long ago, rain pounding on the pavement, flames licking the twisted remains of his car. Pain, so much pain. The acrid scent of burning fuel. The metallic taste of blood in his mouth. And then, the feeling of hands, gentle but strong, pulling him from the wreckage. A soft voice murmuring words he couldn't quite remember. He had tried to look at his rescuer, but his vision was a blur. Before he could even thank her, she was gone, disappearing into the night. John frowned, rubbing his temples. Why was he thinking about this now? He had spent years trying to move on, to bury that part of his past. But something about tonight made the memory surface, unshakable and persistent. With a sigh, he leaned back in his chair, stretching his tense shoulders. It's just exhaustion, he told himself. He had been pushing himself too hard again. Down in the dimly lit corridors of the company's lower floors, Elena Carter moved quietly, her mop gliding over the marble floors. She had worked at Caldwell Enterprises for nearly 2 years, blending into the background, unseen and unnoticed, just the way she preferred it. She wasn't one for office gossip, nor did she try to interact with the executives, who rarely acknowledged her presence. Yet, there was one person she couldn't help but notice. John Caldwell. Every night, long after most employees had left, he remained in his office, drowning in work. Unlike others, he never made a mess, never left coffee rings on the mahogany desks, or crumpled papers in frustration. His world was pristine, controlled. But tonight, something was different. As she passed the executive floor on her way to the supply closet, she heard a muffled curse followed by the sound of liquid spilling. Inside his office, John stared at the dark stain spreading across the financial reports on his desk. He had been too lost in thought, reaching for his coffee without looking, only to knock it over. Great, he muttered, standing up abruptly. For once, his perfectly controlled world had slipped. Before he could react, there was a light knock on the door. Mr. Caldwell. John turned, surprised. The voice was soft, almost hesitant. The janitor. He had seen her before in passing, but never paid much attention. She was petite, with chestnut brown hair pulled into a simple ponytail, her uniform neat despite the long hours she must have worked. Do you need help with that? She asked, holding up a cloth. John exhaled, stepping aside. Go ahead. Elena moved swiftly, her hands efficient as she dabbed the papers, salvaging what she could. You should print new copies, she advised, her voice calm. These might smudge. John raised an eyebrow. Most people in the company barely spoke to him unless necessary. He was used to nervous stammering, or exaggerated flattery. But her tone was neutral, almost indifferent. Noted, he said, watching her. As she worked, he noticed the way she focused, completely absorbed in the task, as if cleaning up after a billionaire was just another part of her routine. You're here late, she said without looking up. I could say the same for you, John replied. Elena gave a small shrug. Janitors don't get to work 9 to 5. For some reason, John found himself smirking. It was rare, almost foreign, to him. Thank you, he said after a pause. Elena straightened, looking slightly surprised, then nodded. Just doing my job. As she turned to leave, John spoke again. What's your name? She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Elena. Elena Carter. John repeated the name in his mind as he watched her disappear down the hall. He had never thought twice about the janitorial staff before. But tonight, something about her lingered in his thoughts longer than he expected. And he had no idea just how important she would become. John Caldwell was not a man who believed in distractions. His life was structured, every moment accounted for, every interaction calculated. Yet, ever since that brief encounter with Elena Carter, he found himself strangely aware of her presence. It wasn't just that she had helped him clean up his spilled coffee. It was the way she had spoken to him, unfazed, unbothered by his wealth or status. Most people in his world either feared him, or wanted something from him. Elena, however, seemed indifferent. And for some reason, that intrigued him. He started noticing the small things. How she moved through the halls with quiet efficiency, unnoticed by the rest of the company. How she hummed softly while working, always careful not to disturb the silence. How she treated everyone the same, whether they were executives or interns. One evening, as John worked late once again, he heard the faint sound of footsteps outside his office. Without thinking, he stood up and opened the door. Elena was there, mopping the floor under the dim office lights. She looked up, momentarily surprised. Mr. Caldwell, she greeted simply. John hesitated. What was he even doing? Still here, he asked, as if that weren't obvious. She smirked slightly. Says the man who practically lives in his office. For a moment, John was caught off guard. Was that a joke? People didn't joke with him. Before he could respond, Elena spoke again. You don't have to stay so late, you know. Even billionaires need sleep. John crossed his arms, amusement flickering across his otherwise unreadable face. And what about janitors? Elena shrugged. We get used to it. Something about the way she said it, so simple, so matter-of-fact, made John pause. She wasn't complaining. She wasn't bitter. She just accepted her reality. And for the first time in a long time, John felt something stir inside him. Curiosity. Over the next few weeks, John found himself seeking out Elena in small, subtle ways. At first, it was unintentional, he simply happened to be in the same place as her. But soon, he realized he was waiting for her. He would leave his office door slightly open, so he could hear her approaching. If she was cleaning the hallway, he would step out for a glass of water, something he never used to do. And, strangely enough, Elena didn't seem to mind their small interactions. One night, as she wiped down a conference room table, John leaned against the doorway, watching her. You don't seem like the type of person who enjoys this job, he said. Elena didn't stop wiping. What type of person do you think enjoys cleaning up after others? He smirked. Fair point. She finally looked up. It's a job. It pays the bills. John tilted his head. But is it what you want? Elena hesitated, as if no one had ever asked her that before. I don't know, she admitted. I've never really had the luxury of thinking about what I want. John wasn't sure why that answer unsettled him. Everyone should have that luxury, he murmured. Elena gave a small, skeptical laugh. Not everyone is a billionaire, Mr. Caldwell. John, he corrected without thinking. Elena blinked. What? My name. You can call me John. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. John. Something about the way she said it sent an unfamiliar warmth through him. While John was trying to understand his newfound fascination with Elena, she was struggling with a revelation of her own. The more time she spent around John, the more familiar he seemed. His voice. His presence. Even the way he carried himself, it all tugged at something in her memory. She had never forgotten the night she pulled a stranger from a burning car. She had been walking home from a late shift when she saw the accident. While others stood frozen in shock, she had acted. The driver had been unconscious, bleeding, his car seconds away from exploding. She had dragged him to safety. Held his hand as he gasped for air. And then, before the sirens arrived, she had slipped away into the night, unnoticed. She never knew who he was. But now, she had a feeling. The thought made her stomach twist. Could John Caldwell, the ruthless billionaire, really be the man she had saved all those years ago? If he was, should she tell him? No. Their worlds were too different. He was a man of wealth and power. She was just a janitor. Whatever had happened that night had been fate, but it didn't mean their paths were meant to cross again. She had saved him once. That was enough. Or at least, that's what she told herself. John didn't understand what was happening to him. He had spent years keeping people at a distance. Love, relationships, even friendships, they had never mattered to him. But now, for the first time in his life, he found himself wanting to know someone. Not because of business. Not because it benefited him. But simply because he enjoyed her presence. And that realization was terrifying. Because John Caldwell didn't fall for anyone. Did he? John Caldwell rarely looked back at his past. The past was irrelevant. It didn't make money. It didn't build empires. It was nothing more than a series of events leading him to where he was today. But one restless night, unable to shake his thoughts of Elena, he found himself revisiting something he had long buried. The accident. It had happened years ago, late at night, during a storm. He had been driving home after a business deal, exhausted, when a truck lost control and crashed into his car. Everything after that was a blur, the unbearable heat, the sound of metal screeching, the darkness threatening to consume him. But then, there was her. A woman. He had never seen her face, only felt her hands pulling him from the wreckage, her voice urging him to stay awake. She had been the last thing he remembered before the paramedics arrived. And then she was gone. He had searched for her, even hired investigators, but no one had seen her, no one had known who she was. Eventually, he stopped looking. Until now. A strange feeling gnawed at him, and before he knew it, he was searching online for the accident report. It was an old article, buried under years of financial news about Caldwell Enterprises. Billionaire heir survives fiery crash. Mysterious rescuer disappears before paramedics arrive. John's eyes scanned the article. The details matched his memories. The crash. The witnesses who saw a woman pulling him from the wreckage. A single detail stood out. She was described as wearing a silver pendant with a blue stone, but before responders could identify her, she vanished into the night. John's heartbeat thundered in his ears. A silver pendant. A blue stone. Slowly, his mind pieced it together. He had seen that pendant before. On Elena. The next day, John could barely focus on work. His mind was fixated on one thing: he needed answers. When the office emptied for the night, he waited. He knew she would be there. And right on time, Elena stepped into the hallway with her cleaning cart, humming softly. John's chest tightened. The pendant rested against her collarbone, the same silver chain, the same blue stone. He had to know the truth. Elena. She turned, slightly startled to find him waiting. Oh? You're still here. John stepped closer, his gaze locked onto hers. No hesitation. No small talk. Where did you get that pendant? Elena blinked. What? The pendant, he said firmly. Where did you get it? Elena instinctively touched the small blue stone. It was a gift. From whom? She hesitated. It belonged to my mother. Why? John exhaled slowly, trying to keep his emotions in check. You saved me. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Elena's breath hitched. What? You were there, John pressed. The night of my accident. You pulled me from the car. You saved my life. Elena's lips parted slightly, her carefully guarded secret exposed. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to. Instead, she lowered her gaze, gripping the pendant tightly. I didn't know it was you, she admitted softly. John felt a strange mix of shock and gratitude crash over him like a wave. She had been right in front of him all along. Why didn't you ever say anything? He asked, his voice quieter now. Elena swallowed. Because, you're you. John Caldwell. A billionaire, the CEO of this company. And I'm just, don't say that, John interrupted. You saved my life. You're not just anything. She shook her head. I wasn't expecting anything in return. I did what anyone would have done. No, you didn't, he said firmly. You could have walked away. But you didn't. And I never got to thank you. Elena let out a soft, nervous laugh. You don't have to. I didn't do it for a reward. John studied her for a long moment. This woman, humble, kind, selfless, had been the reason he was still alive. And suddenly, he realized something else. He didn't just owe her his life. He owed her his heart. The air between them felt different now, charged with something neither of them could deny. John took a deep breath. Elena, I don't just want to thank you. She looked up at him, confused. Then what do you want? John hesitated. How did he even put this into words? I don't know how it happened, he admitted, but somewhere between the late-night conversations and watching you work harder than anyone I know, I realized I care about you. Elena's eyes widened, her fingers trembling around her pendant. John. I know it doesn't make sense, he continued, running a hand through his hair. I know we come from different worlds, but that doesn't matter to me. What matters is that you're here. And I don't want to pretend like I don't feel something for you. Elena let out a shaky breath. This was too much. Too unexpected. I need time, she finally whispered. John nodded, respecting her hesitation. Take all the time you need. Just don't push me away. She gave him a small, uncertain smile. I won't. For the first time in years, John felt like he was standing at the beginning of something real. And he had no intention of letting it slip away. John Caldwell had spent his life chasing success, but for the first time, he realized that wealth meant nothing without someone to share it with. The morning after his conversation with Elena, he made a decision: the world needed to know the truth. At Caldwell Enterprises, he called an emergency press conference. The media, employees, and business elites gathered in the grand hall, curious about what the powerful billionaire had to announce. As the cameras flashed and whispers filled the room, John stood before them, his voice unwavering. "Years ago, I survived a near-fatal accident. I never knew who saved me, until now." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "It was Elena Carter," John continued, glancing toward the side of the stage, where Elena stood, stunned. Employees gasped. "The janitor. The quiet woman who cleaned the hallways at night." John turned toward her, his gaze filled with something deeper than admiration. It was gratitude, respect, and love. "Elena, I owe you my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And today, I want to give you something in return." He pulled out a sleek document. "I'm giving you $15 million as a personal thank you." A gasp filled the room. $15 million. Elena's breath caught. "John. I don't need," he held up a hand, stopping her. "And that's not all. I want you to have a share of Caldwell Enterprises." Silence. Then, a wave of shock spread through the crowd. "You don't have to work another day in your life," John continued, his voice softer. "But if you choose to, I want you to work beside me." Elena's eyes shone with unshed tears. This wasn't just a reward. This was a place in his world. A love that money couldn't buy. After the conference, John and Elena stood in his office, away from the flashing cameras and questioning gazes. "You didn't have to do that," Elena said, shaking her head. "I never saved you for a reward." John smiled. "I know. That's why you deserve it." She hesitated. "And the other part?" "The part about working beside you." John exhaled, stepping closer. "I don't just want you in my company, Elena. I want you in my life." Elena's heart pounded. A janitor and a billionaire. It still didn't feel real. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never seen in anyone else. Honesty. Vulnerability. Love. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. John reached for her hand. "I've never been more sure of anything." Elena searched his face. And then, with a deep breath, she took his hand. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's see where this takes us." John's smile was brighter than the city skyline. And as Elena stepped into her new role, not just as a business partner, but as the woman who had once saved John's life, she realized she had also saved his heart. And in return, he had given her his. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of love, fate, and unexpected twists. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one.